If you do all of those things, I think you can be whoever the fuck you want to be in like 18 months. Hey guys, welcome back to Be the Standard. I'm your host, Denny Jamazzo. Here as always, my best friend and co-host, Mike Burns. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Jason Khalipa. Jason is a husband, a father, CrossFit Games competitor. He's won first, second, and third place. Owner of NCFit gyms, founder of the Train Hard program, and he's also the host of the Jason Khalipa podcast. Did I leave anything out, Jason?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I got a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. I like that too.
Okay, yeah, I did see that on the resume. He's also got a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. So he kicked my ass.
Yeah, I'm on my way to that black belt. One day.
I love that. But yeah, no, man, just to kick things off, like I said earlier when we were just kind of catching up, Mike is an owner of a CrossFit gym. I know he's super excited to have you here. So I'm actually going to kick this over to him and let him get this thing going.
Yeah. Hey, Jason, how's it going?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me.
So a little backstory on me, like these guys have heard on this before. We started CrossFit overseas. Even Denny did. Denny's kind of doesn't do it a lot now, but we all did it overseas in 2010. Came back and I really got into it when I learned the methodology. And then I watched every video, read every article, and I really got into every second counts, obviously, where you end up winning the games. And you really are my favorite CrossFitter, always have been. And I've always kind of looked at your career from a distance, and it's a special treat for me. So I'm going to be a little fanboy today. I apologize if I'm too bad, but when Denny lined this one up, I was pretty pumped. But I just want to start with,
and I just want to say I'm a great friend because I knew you were his favorite CrossFitter, so it's a good one on me, and he's my best friend. So, yeah, I knew what I was doing when I set this one up.
Yeah. But Mike, I appreciate it, man. That means a lot, man. I know that movie Every Second Counts was, for people who haven't seen it, basically it's like a documentary of the CrossFit Games. This is back in the day. And they're following around like three different athletes. They're like making it a big deal. And then all of a sudden I come out of nowhere and just ruin the film. They had done like this beautiful job, like the lead up, like you got Josh Everett, you got, it was a really well done documentary. And then right at the end, like literally with maybe 10 minutes left in the movie, I win. And there was no coverage of me. The video they actually used in that video was taken by my wife at the time. And so they had no coverage of me. And it was just funny how it all played out because these guys really thought that one of those guys were going to win.
Yep.
And then when none of them win, it just ruined the film.
So my question to you, like that's where I really wanted to start because of that movie. How did it feel to be underestimated like that and then to win the CrossFit Games and then get instant respect from the CrossFit community?
I mean, I didn't have really any expectations because I don't know if I had earned the right to have like expectations on me, right? Like what I mean by that is, no one knew who I was. Like at one point there was someone who came to a local event and they saw me and they're like, oh, this guy looks pretty good. But at the time I had no, kind of background to earn the right for someone to be like, oh, that guy's going to win. I was just kind of another competitor. And from that point on that year, obviously I was considered a contender every year, but, yeah, I mean, it never really made me feel any emotion because I didn't expect to win. I just wanted to go out there and leave it all on the table. And what's interesting about Every Second Counts, because we're talking about it, the CrossFit Games started in 2007 on a ranch in Aromas, California. And the first winner, his name was James Fitzgerald. And he was also competing in 2008. But what made 2008 unique is that all the events were in like kind of shorter time domains. And so the final event, the way they structured it was every second counts, all your times were accumulated. And then the final event, you got staggered based on how many seconds you had. So whoever won that final event, because the way you were staggered, you won the overall everything. And so I was in 12th place at the time. And so I started about a minute and a half behind the leader. And I had to catch up with the leader and then win. So that was pretty exhilarating. It was a really unique, awesome experience. It'll never happen again in CrossFit because they're never going to structure it like that again. But for what that was, it was pretty badass.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember just the interview they had before the final event, and they didn't really pay much attention to you. And I look at it this way, because I'm a bigger guy. Back then, I feel like if you were a bigger guy and doing CrossFit, you didn't have the typical CrossFit body. Did you feel that way at all, or is that just something I'm seeing from the outside looking in?
Well, I mean, if you look back on that day and age, John Wellborn got a lot of love in that movie.
It's true.
And, I think he had played for the Kansas City Chiefs, if I'm not mistaken, right before that. And so he was a big guy. I mean, he was big and strong and whatever. I don't know if at the time I thought I was like too big or whatever. I just didn't know what I didn't know. Like we were backstage and like people were talking about Olympic lifting shoes. I'll never forget, like, walking around, everybody had the same shoes on, but I just had like some old school, Nikes on, because I didn't know that the heel lift would help an Oli shoe. I'd never been exposed to that. So it was stuff like that that made me realize like I was a little bit out of my league, but then all of a sudden, once you win, then it kind of all takes care of itself.
Yeah, for sure, man. I thought it was cool watching a guy. I saw you as an underdog and as a bigger guy. When I first came back from Afghanistan, I went to my first CrossFit gym, CrossFit New England. I had a guy literally say that to me. He probably thought I never did CrossFit before. He's like, "Oh, you're going to lose all your size." Whatever. He had no idea I've been doing CrossFit for over a year, and I already knew like, no, this is my size. This is who I am. But so you always kind of looked at it that way. Nobody sees me as a CrossFitter. They see me as a bodybuilder.
Well, you started CrossFit. Okay, so CrossFit New England, that's a great place to be. I mean, obviously Ben Bergeron and the entire crew there were legit.
Yeah, so when I got back from Afghanistan, because I'm a Framingham firefighter, town right next door, and the guy I was doing who taught us CrossFit up there was a Navy SEAL. He's like, "Oh, you have to go to CrossFit New England." So I was like, "All right, makes sense." I didn't know anything about it then. I go there, and it was just one guy. He saw me. He was like, "Hey, you're going to lose all your size starting to do CrossFit." And he didn't know that I'd already been doing CrossFit for years. Like, no, I just kept to myself. Like, this is my size. I'm not going to lose my size. But all these years, everyone just thinks I'm a bodybuilder. No one thinks I'm a CrossFitter. You know what I mean? Obviously, my gym people know. I've had my gym for 10 years. But it's funny because you'll never be pegged as a CrossFitter if you looked at me, I guess. So.
Yeah. And, it's over the years, CrossFit's done a good job, in my opinion, of kind of bridging this gap between functional strength and kind of looking at it more as like what work can you perform versus like aesthetic appeal. I think that, for me, things have evolved over the years. I went from trying to be the fittest on earth, which was a highly, my goal, to now it's like, what are my goals, right? I'm 38 years old. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. I, own businesses, and it's like, what are my goals? My goals now is really evolved. I want to be able to use training to show up for my family, my community. And I do things like every week we do men's workouts in parking lots. I focus on trying to train so I can protect and provide. And I think that's really important to me and how it's evolved. And the way I look aesthetically kind of flows with that. My strong why as a dad is like, hey, I want to be able to run, jump, climb, lift. I want to be able to go do anything my kids want to go do. And then the byproduct is I look a certain way because I'm training, but that's my deep why that's going to be with me for the rest of my life. It's less about the six pack. It's more about that journey and being able to provide those things for my kids, and then the six pack and whatever kind of come with it.
Yeah, I love that. That's what I said. I always say like the physique and all that, that's just a byproduct of what we do. One of my questions I had, you kind of brought it up already, is like what caused this shift from competition? Because I know after you did individual, you did NC, NorCal CrossFit, you guys were killing it for years, and then you guys you kind of shifted away from that because I know was it around the same time your daughter was diagnosed with leukemia?
Yeah. So I competed professionally in CrossFit for about 10 years, and towards the end of my journey, not the end, I mean, really in the beginning. So when I first got into CrossFit, like I never got into it for the money, the fame, none of it, right? I just got into it because I love to train, and I opened up a gym early, 2008, and every year I'd show up at the CrossFit Games, and I was on this like dude, I was on the rocket ship. I mean, you remember it, man. Yeah. It just was a rocket ship from like 2011 to 2015, which is, and I, before I would compete at the CrossFit Games every year, I'd talk to my wife and I'd be like, hey, what is our commitment level here? Where do you feel like we're at? Because it wasn't just a me decision. It was an our decision because, at the time, especially like 2010, 11, I signed a big corporate contract with Western Digital. So I'd be traveling around the world, opening up gyms. I was, at the time we had, my daughter, my son was coming on the way. And it's like, what do we want to do as a family? So every year we'd have that conversation, right? Are we prepared to make the sacrifice? Are we prepared? Are we prepared? Well, around 2013, the conversation kind of shifted. It's like, hey, I think we got a couple more years. That was like kind of her thing. Then 2014 comes around. It's like, hey, I don't know if we could, whatever. So then we shifted to team. And then in 2016, my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. And that was just an instant, just like I'm going this direction. Right.
Yeah.
So, for that, it's interesting because, if that didn't happen, I don't know how long I would have competed in CrossFit for. But sometimes life has a way of just kind of guiding where you need to go. And that was a really eye-opening experience. Obviously, I couldn't sacrifice, the business, right? I needed to make sure that we were providing. I needed to make sure that the family was strong, and this fitness was a critical component of my life, but I couldn't dedicate, hours and hours a day to trying to compete when I needed to be in the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest questions I've always admired about you is when you made the shift, or maybe this was happened simultaneously, I'm not sure, is you had a bunch of NCFits at one point. Now, I don't know if you scaled back since then, but you've always stayed relevant in the CrossFit space because I watched you as a CrossFit Games athlete, and then you were the standard for like opening up a bunch of gyms. Like, how did that come to be, and how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, so I started off in the fitness space when I was 15, and I started off working at a traditional health club. And at the time when I graduated from high school, I started doing sales at the gym, and I had a couple mentors there who really took me underneath their wing and taught me everything about the business side of fitness, right? Where the sales, all the things. And that's the way I came up. Imagine like you're a young, impressionable kid, 16, 17 years old, and just every day talking about business. Weekly, I'd meet with the head owner and get on the elliptical and talk about business. And that's all I knew. Then I found CrossFit, and I combined that business knowledge with this idea of like coaching and results. And so when I started my own gym, I thought it was a little bit counterintuitive because everybody in CrossFit would always talk about how like making money was like a bad thing. And it just always threw me off because I came up a different way, right? I came up in a way where, hey, make a lot of money, be super successful, and then go back and give to things you care about, right? Like be a good human, of course, but you got to make to give. And so ever since day one, I've treated the business like a business and not a hobby. And in the beginning, it kind of threw some people off because they weren't used to it. But as we opened up more locations, 1 to 2 to 5 to 10 to 20, whatever, people started to realize that. So I started hosting, business seminars and doing a lot of types of things to try and help the overall ecosystem. Got some pushback there, but long story short, we opened up a bunch of gyms. Then through COVID, we had to consolidate down. And now we still own and operate brick and mortar gyms. It's just consolidated down significantly. And then we have a large digital audience for gym owners, and then also Train Hard, which is for guys who want to get after it in their garage or in the gym. And that's like more of my current purpose. So like for years, I was just dedicated to owning, operating gyms, making an impact and helping gym owners. Now my purpose right now is like helping men train hard so that they could be there for their families and embody these characteristics for their kids and things like that.
I love how you brought up how the culture was back then, like about the community, not about the business. If you're too businessy, and I felt that way for years up until COVID hit, and I almost lost everything. Right, I lost so much money, and it made me realize what you're saying has been true back then is now. You got to have a good business to have a community, and you got to be successful to give back. You can give back through that. So I love that you said that, and you were way ahead of your time with that, because I feel like a lot of CrossFit gyms have fallen into the trap I did. And that's why they lost their gyms during COVID, is because you gotta focus on the business to have a community. So I love that.
Yeah, and one of the things you said that I liked was kind of how, the aesthetics of working out is a byproduct of, just putting in the work and being able to do the run, jump, climb, all that stuff with your kids, and kind of just be there and be able to perform. Mike knows this as well as anybody. I'm very hard on like the veteran community, the law enforcement community, the firefighter community, when they're not fit and they're not able to do their jobs, or they're not representing or they're not representing the uniform the way I think it should be represented, and they don't look a certain way, and because I think all that translates right into other aspects or other things. So I'm very hard on those communities. I'm curious to know, like, what level of work you kind of do with those types of guys. If those guys come to you and say, hey, Jason, I need a kick in the ass. I need to get my shit together and get back to, the physical condition that I should be at in order to perform my duties.
Yeah, I mean, we do quite a bit of work with law enforcement. So a couple of things I'm currently doing. So if you live anywhere in the Bay Area, California, come by every week. We get 50 to 100 guys in a parking lot. And we throw down hard on the weekends. It's completely free. And it's just my way of wanting to create a network of just dudes who do hard stuff together. So now that we address that, moving on to the law enforcement, military, et cetera. Customs and Border Protection, their SRT side is one of our biggest partners. And what I'm a big believer in is whenever I go and speak to different law enforcement groups, primarily I work with different SWAT groups.
Sure.
The biggest thing that I try and express to them, and I'll express to anybody, is that in grappling, in firearms. So I spend a lot of time, I go to the range. I train about once a week on the range, and I train jiu-jitsu multiple times a week. And when you're out on the range, when you're rolling jiu-jitsu, what you learn is that there's certain people that are very proficient at what they're doing, but as soon as you introduce any type of stimulus outside of what they're used to, whether that's stress or fitness or whatever, all of a sudden those skills seem to diminish at times. And so what I try and explain to these different organizations is that you could be really good at shooting, at grappling, at name the thing, first aid, putting on a tourniquet, right? But if you can't breathe, it's going to be very difficult for you to perform that task. And so at the bottom of the pyramid, right, if you're looking at a pyramid in terms of like being able to protect yourself and your family, I'd say at the very bottom of that pyramid is your physical and mental health at the bottom. Like how is your overall fitness? Can you run? Can you sprint? Can you jump? Can you lift? Can you do these things? Because if you can't do that, and you're like, the likelihood of me getting into a shooting is pretty unlikely, especially because I'm not law enforcement, right? The likelihood of me getting into a fist hand-to-hand combat or grappling with some dude on the street is probably pretty unlikely. But the likelihood that I have to go maybe lift my kid up, run after them, go chase them down, go whatever, name the thing, it's way more likely. And so I feel like at the bottom of the pyramid, we need to focus as a community on, hey, is your fitness on lock? And are you, doing things to mentally be in a better state? And there's so many ways you can dive into that. Then the next layer would be some type of first aid. Like, hey, have you exposed yourself to some basic first aid, right? Like in my car, I have an AED, I have a tourniquet, I have, pressure dressing. And maybe that's a little extreme for some people, but do you at least have some basic knowledge of CPR? Then you could talk combatives, then you could talk firearms. But I feel like at the base, if you don't have your fitness on point, really, it's going to be overcome by events. If you chase somebody down, you could know how to grapple really well, but if you're so out of breath, you cannot control yourself. That's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and that brings me back to something that we discussed on previous episodes before, where we learned the hard way when we were deployed overseas. Getting into it and guys not being in the proper physical condition. And like you said, you can be a great shot, you can be great at your job and great at all these things. Like you said, name the thing. But if you can't breathe, then you're not much use to the guys around you. And so we actually ended up putting all of our guys through a stress test where, Mike and I, we went through it first. We had guys yelling at us. We had guys, screaming at us. And, we're having to do all these things like assemble and disassemble weapons under stress, run, shoot, move, communicate, all these things. And that's kind of how we decided, what jobs, our guys were going to have while we were out on missions, because we, like I said, learned that lesson where guys just weren't in shape. So we had to do something like that to dictate, what guys' roles were going to be moving forward.
Yeah, one of my favorite things I've been doing as of recently, I've been training for what's called the tactical games. Have you guys heard of the tactical games?
Yes. I don't know. I've heard of it.
So one of my favorite things I've been training for as of recently, I'm doing my first one in September, is it's 2-gun, right? So it's like a 9mm pistol and a rifle, and you do like fitness and you combine it with shooting, and the shooting can go up to 400 or 500 yards. And what I like about it is, like this Friday, I'm going to to go train for this. And one of my favorite things about it is, dude, you're getting your heart rate jacked up, and can you then control yourself and get on target? And that's not because I don't have a military and law enforcement background. Like I hadn't been exposed to that. And so it's been really fun for me to say, hey, in CrossFit, you test all these physical skills, but accuracy for the most part isn't tested too much. But all of a sudden, when you're trying to shoot, like it requires quite a bit of accuracy. And so that's one of my favorite things about it. So back to your point, I think sports like that are also raising awareness to how big of an impact it has when your heart rate's elevated to get on target versus, just kind of at the shooting range doing your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that's where you've kind of taken the direction. I absolutely love that because my full-time job, I'm a firefighter. Obviously, I'm a CrossFit gym as well. And I'm still in the Guard, still active in the military. So all these things are very important to me, tactical athlete, whatever. But the functional fitness in everything we do, especially firefighting, or anything, right? But yeah, so I didn't know that's the kind of the way you went. I'm actually really intrigued that the stuff that you're doing now. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved, right, Mike? Because, for me, I've owned and operated gyms for almost 20 years. And I've seen tons of impacts there for men, for women, for you name it, right? We're trying to create a culture. But in the last couple of years, what's been really calling to me is I've been spending a lot of time at jiu-jitsu gyms. I started jiu-jitsu 8 years ago. And you see a lot of guys, it's a predominantly male-driven environment. And there's a lot of connections that are fostered. And we could then bring our sons in there and it could create a culture where they're surrounded by like-minded men who want to see good men do good things. And I want to try and do better for my community. And so almost a year ago to the day, I started these free men's club workouts because what I want to do is I just want to get back to shared suffering. I want to get back to these things and I want to be able to then finish from that and go get a coffee and have these guys connect. And it's been really powerful. But then what I want to do is even do more stuff for young men, right? And I'm a big believer, my children, I think self-defense is an absolutely critical skill to teach, especially to young boys. Because I want to create, I want to support my son in being, the toughest guy in the room, who's also the most compassionate and loving. And it's really important to me. I want him to be able to defend himself, defend others if needed, have those skill sets, but at the same time, not need to use them because he's comfortable, he's confident, and he's compassionate. And I feel like we need more and more of that permeated locally. And I'm trying to do my best to do that. And then through Train Hard, I try and do that digitally, everywhere else.
Man, that's absolutely awesome. I mean, I didn't know you were doing. So you do a free workout every week for the past year, and just to the community.
We're on week 43. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's cool. I love seeing that someone has done all that you've done and still giving back to that capacity. I know if I was in the area, I'd be absolutely going to those workouts. I mean, that's really cool. What does the structure look like for those workouts?
Yeah, I mean, the heart of it is, some people are like, and very few people actually, I should say, like in the beginning, I was like torn because my heart, like, it's going to sound fluffy, but like my desire was like, hey, I want to make an impact. And well, people would say, well, you have gyms, you're making an impact. It's like, yeah, I am, but there's a barrier to entry. It's a couple $100 a month. You have to go to the gym, blah, blah. I was like, I want to break the barrier down as simple as possible. And I want to get back to the basics. I want to get back to grimy. The grimier, the better. The nastier, the better. And so every week it's just like, we do 6 a.m. And it's like, why 6 a.m.? Because I want to be able to narrow down the people who show up. I want people who take this seriously. I want them to not take the extra couple of drinks on a Friday night because they want to come in on Saturday and want to hit it. And we're going to get there when it's still dark, and it's going to invoke an emotion, and we're going to get 40, 50, 60 guys to do burpees. And the way we do it is it's a 45 to an hour long session. I lead it, but I also work out while we're doing it. And we do things to start off. Typically we start off with what's called a burpee test. One of the things I'm trying to do with my local community is get as many men to do 10 minutes of burpees, 15 burpees a minute, every minute for 10 minutes. That's one of my goals. So I've been starting off the men's club the last 10 weeks doing 5 minutes. Very few guys can still do that. So I'm trying to get everybody to be able to do 5 minutes, and then I'm going to start increasing that. And then after that, I use sandbags. GoRuck was generous enough to send me a bunch of sandbags. So we do a lot of sandbag stuff. Yeah, that's the model. It's just, and then you get about half the guys to show up and go grab coffee after. It's been really cool.
That is really cool. So it's just, I'm assuming this is outside somewhere.
It's just in a parking lot of a local library. Yeah.
I think I've seen pictures of that on Instagram.
Yeah, man. I sent it started off as a text. So, okay, backing up just for a quick second. It originally started 2 reasons. The one was that my local law enforcement, I wanted to invite them because selfishly, I was like, hey guys, listen, if I call you and I'm more fit, like I need the fittest, most capable people on my side if I call you. So selfishly, can I offer this for free and you just come so that we could help you? And then secondly, at my kids' school, they have a men's club, and I'm not sure if you guys have experienced this, but oftentimes it's surrounded by beer and pizza, and you just meet up and you talk shop.
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm like, dude, I'm not like anti beer and pizza. Like, let's go grab some beer and pizza. But let's also be more than that, right? Let's share some suffering together and really create some bonds and like get down. And so I said, hey guys, instead of meeting this week for a beer and pizza, let's go out and let's go hit a ruck. And then it kind of evolved from there. It started off those two reasons. It was to impact the local police department and my local kids' school. And then all of a sudden it just grew from there.
Yeah, man, I'm fired up. I mean, that's one of the coolest things I've heard. We've interviewed a bunch of people that do a lot of things, and that's really cool. That's something, if you don't mind, I'm going to probably try to emulate on my end up here in the Northeast. I mean, that's awesome.
Dude, steal it, man. Yeah, on social media, I put up a lot of pictures about it, and I even did like a short podcast on how it got started and the inspiration. One thing I will note, because it sounds like you're interested in it, is that we always do AMRAPs and EMOMs. There is no 4-time workouts.
Love it.
And I always pitch in the beginning. I'm like, hey guys, listen, if you've been here a bunch of times, like, bro, let's get down today. If this is your first time, take it easy. Leave your ego at the door. Nobody cares if you get 10 reps or 5 reps. No one's even watching. Because if you can't sit on the toilet and you can't play with your kids, that's the antithesis of what I'm trying to accomplish here. I'm trying to help you guys go home and show up for your family so you could go throw the baseball, go throw the football. And if you're so sore you can't move your arms, like that's anti what we're trying to do. So just chill. And EMOMs and AMRAPs are a good way to do that, because then people aren't pushing for the clock, right? We all start at the same time. We all finish at the same time.
I love that. And speaking of that, a member brought this up to me earlier, a couple days ago, actually, and I love that you just brought this up. Do you feel like, especially when you get a lot of type A personalities like that together, that they're able to scale back that intensity being around all those people, or do you feel like some people, you just no talking them down?
It's a little bit of both. Some guys, I think after the first time, they have to kind of take the realization like, hey, what it is sometimes though, it's not even like an ego thing. I've had to relax that conversation and be like, it's an energy thing. Like they show up and I'm sitting there, I'm like, guys, let's go. And then all of a sudden they're fueling off the energy, not so much like their ego, but just like the three of us. Like if we went and we hit a workout, I wouldn't be trying necessarily like beat you guys, but we would just be vibing. We'd be having a positive energy. And so we'd be pushing extra hard because of that. And so I've had to like in the middle of the workouts be like, hey guys, listen, I know like, dude, the vibes are right. The energy's strong, but like, if you're new to the game, please just don't do this portion. And so I kind of try and find ways to do that. So it gives guys outs and reminders that even though like they're in the flow, they're in the zone, they need to be able to walk tomorrow. You know what I mean? That's what's been helpful.
Yeah, just going a little bit backwards here. Like one of the things I like is that instead of going to the beer and pizza route, you're going to the rock, you're going to the workouts, you're going to something hard. Because as I'm just sitting here thinking about it, right, you get a bunch of guys sitting around drinking beer, eating pizza. They're not talking about things that are of value. They're not getting any better at anything except for eating and drinking, right? But when you get guys together and they're doing hard things, right, they're becoming better physically, they're becoming better mentally. The conversations turn into things that are much more valuable. And so to make that shift from, we're going to do something easy, sit around and bullshit and be lazy, to, no, let's go do something hard. You just, like, those are the things that I think are transformational in men. And I think it's just so important. And, we have so many guys that, like Mike said, we've had guys on and so many guys that are trying to make an impact in that space, because we just had Nick Freitas on last week. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nick, but he's a huge advocate for, just men being men and, men taking on those traditional masculine roles. And, that's certainly something that we believe in. So to have more people, the more people we have out there pushing that message and doing that, the better, I think, because I think just generally speaking, the role of the traditional man is intentionally being diminished.
I think one thing for me that's really important is like, Denny, to your point, like I felt that way. Like I wanted to see, men, I wanted to see my community thrive. I wanted to see also good. I wanted to surround my son with other like-minded men who have similar core values to mine. And I started asking myself this question, like over a year ago, aside from like the men's club and the police department, I was like, what am I doing to make an impact? And sure, I'd put out messages on social media, and obviously we have the gyms, but this was like a really black and white, like, dude, I'm getting up at 5 a.m. to prep my truck, to go drive down to a parking lot, to be the guy who does the thing. And originally I just said, hey guys, I'm going to be there by myself. I don't care if anybody shows up. And that was the mentality I had to have, because in the beginning, it's not going to grow super fast, right? Like you might have 2 people, you might have nobody. But I think if the mentality is like, hey, I'm going to put this out to the world, I'm going to show up in this parking lot, I'm going to train hard, whether I'm by myself or not, join me if you want. That's the way to start. Then it starts to evolve. I mean, at this point now, like it's pretty consistent that we're going to have quite a few people show up, but starting it off with this mentality that, hey, I want to impact my local community. And I don't just want to talk about impacting my local community. I want to actually try and do something. This is a free way for me to do it. But it does require work, and it requires consistency, which is hard.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I've always said that. I've had my CrossFit gym for 10 years, and I've like, I always want to be able to give back, especially to the law enforcement, firefighter. I'm military because I'm a firefighter in the military. And same thing, like you got a gym, I was like, how do I give back to the community? And this has really just sparked my interest. It obviously in the firefighter culture, they do like our bonding's through like a lot of drinking, right? And hanging out. And I like what Deddy brought up is like doing shared suffering. The conversations you have afterwards when you guys have coffee, how do you feel those are pretty good conversations?
Yeah, I mean, they're not surface level, right? I mean, what happens in the beginning is like, let's just say the 3 of us, right? The first time we get to meet each other, maybe like, I don't know, we meet each other in a workout. We just like, hey bro, what's up? Like, hey man, I'm Jason. Hey, what's going on? How are you? Like pretty like low key. Then we see each other again. It's like, hey man, like, you were here last week, right? Yeah. Oh dude, that was a hard one. Oh yeah. We start talking a little bit more. Then the next week they show up, right? And it's like, hey bro, like, hey man, dude, you want to like go grab a coffee real quick and just like whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey man, so then all of a sudden it starts to go it's not the first time. It's not the second time. It's like the 3rd or 4th time. Then all of a sudden people navigate towards a space where they can actually connect on a deeper level. Cause like in the middle of a workout, it's kind of hard to connect. But I do partner people up. So they get to know some people like in the workout, but it's low key. Then when you go to the actual coffee, that's where real impact is made. Like just in the recently, this was last week, this guy, I'll give you an example. This is a real life example. 2 weeks ago, this guy from Venezuela, he's been coming for weeks and weeks and weeks. We have we have many law enforcement officers that come. And this guy from Venezuela had never been exposed to firearms before. And frankly, he had kind of a negative connotation towards them. And through the men's club, he heard us talking about it because, I just got my CCW. And so we were just talking about stuff, right? And he became intrigued. And through conversation, long story short, the guy last week goes to the shooting range with one of the law enforcement officers and gets taught how to shoot for the first time. And the way that it just changed his viewpoint on things and opened up his mind and taught him a new skill, like that would have never have happened had he not been connected through the men's club. And that's one random example, but like we talk about homeschooling versus traditional schooling. We talk about, stuff that's like really mattering to people. Like, hey, as a dad, the stresses of what it means to provide financially and how do we handle those type of things? What do we want to instill in our children? How hard is too hard? Like, so those are the kind of conversations that happen and they're very meaningful because of it. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly what I would, the conversations I would think after people more receptive after a hard workout and they really take it in. I love what you're doing, man. That's so cool.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speaks to like why I keep my circle so small is because I don't like having those meaningless conversations and just wasting my time with, again, these conversations that add no value, add no substance. And so I think that's what's made Mike and I so close over the years, in addition to just that military bond and having worked together, is that, the discussions that we have on this podcast, we've been talking about these things for 4, 5, 6 years prior to ever putting it out there for the world to hear. And again, that's why I think it's important to roll in a small circle and why I continue to do so and only make sure that, the people that are still a part of my circle are bringing the value, or otherwise they get cut out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But one question that I had for you, because when I think of, looking back at the CrossFit Games, again, I'm not as much of a fan or as into it as Mike is or anything like that. I did CrossFit for about 4 years or so, including the year that we did overseas. And I look back at that era, right? I think of you with Josh Bridges, Rich Froning. I was a huge Rich Froning guy, and I was telling Mike before we logged on before you logged on was I'm not just saying this, but Rich was my guy, and then right after it was you. You guys were like my two
Thanks.
my
Thank you.
my two favorite guys to watch compete, and I love Josh Bridges just because he was such a little guy and he just fucking crushed it all the time. But real quick, I just wanted to ask you, who did you see as your biggest threat and competitor? Was it Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, someone was talking about Josh Bridges, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I heard he was, the number one forever." I was like, well, Josh was unique because he was a little bit on a smaller guy. He did things that were uncommon for how small he was, and he was active duty while still performing well, and like so that was very unique. Um, but the biggest threat in terms of like contenders for the podium was definitely Rich, 100%. He was legit, and he still is legit, and he's a good example of someone who's evolved. He was doing fire, then got deep into fitness, did that for a really long time, competing individually and then on a team, and now you see him doing things like hunting and other stuff. And I think that it's important to look at your fitness, set pillars and goals, and understand like what your deep why is, because otherwise you're just going to get burnt out, man. Like if your only reason for training is because you want to look jacked at the beach, like that's cool when you're 18, 19, 20, maybe even up into your 30s. Like it's pretty cool. Like, dude, I want to look ripped.
Yeah.
But then eventually it's like, man, how am I going to do this same thing until I'm like 90? And
Yeah.
so once you start refocusing what the deep why is, that's where it's at. And I think like you got guys like Rich, me, a lot of jujitsu, a lot of like tactical types training. Those are just things that fire me up. So I set goals along the way to go hit them. I'm doing a High Rocks in November, which is like a running type event. I'm just always trying to think about what can I chase from a fitness perspective. And then obviously if I storytell around it and get people fired up, that's great.
Yeah, so that's probably one of my last questions I have for you personally. But is what does the future for you look like? You keep recalibrating, you keep growing. You kind of already told us what you're doing right now, but what do you see in the future for you?
I think it's always scary to pivot where your business is at. And I think that it's an interesting from a business perspective, purely business. I think that if you don't evolve, you're going to perish. You look at companies like Blockbuster and others. They didn't evolve accordingly, and they were left behind by companies like Netflix. But when you're actually the CEO or the founder, it's hard to make pivots that feel like you're changing. It's hard. But there is no other option but to evolve and to change. Like, it's a good old saying like, hey, you're different than you were 20 years ago. It's like, no shit. I should be different than I was 20 years ago. And the same thing applies for business, but oftentimes it's hard. I don't know if you guys have ever felt this before, but like you're doing one thing as a business, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? My gut is telling me something. My passions are telling me something. I want to go move in this direction. And so in January, we launched Train Hard. And it's not to say like the impact we're making on the NCFit side with gym owners, with coaches, with brick and mortar, it's incredible. But these other things were drawing to me. And I wanted to be able to speak to them in an authentic way. And that's why we rolled out Train Hard. And so you asked the question, like, where are we going? Like, I want to still see success within our brick and mortar and for gym owners. That's of course, that's a part of my legacy, and that's where I want to be. I also want to be able to service people who align with my core values of train, protect, and provide. And I want to provide them resources and tools through online, through our podcast, through our newsletter. What fires me up is getting messages from people saying, hey, like I started taking training more seriously and it impacted me in this many ways. Because I feel like, especially nowadays, not enough people are talking about all the unique benefits of fitness. It's not about the aesthetics. Like the aesthetics are a byproduct. It's about what it does for you in between the ears. It's about your ability to do shit when you're older. Like, who wants to be the guy who's 60 or 70 who can't go on a hike? Who wants to be the guy that's 40 who can't go do something with their kids because they can't get off the couch? It's like, man, that's what I want to talk to. I want to inspire them to start doing something. It's just not that complicated. You just have to be consistent with it. capable. Yeah. I think the capable is the biggest thing, you know, like I think about it all
Huge.
the time. Like in my local communities, looking around, we live in a relatively fit place, but like, dude, like life is going to come. It's not if, it's when. Life is going to come and kick you in the nuts. It's going to. And it could be for so many ways, right? And you can talk about this in a variety of ways. Like I was at the beach the other day and I see all these parents standing on the shore. I was kind of in and out with my son, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, dude, they're on the shore and they're trying to watch their kids, which I think is great, and I'm not dismissing that. But I started thinking to myself, like, do you think they ever think to themselves, like, let's just say my child actually needed me? Do I have the physical capability to support them? Like, I was wondering that in my mind. Like, yes, they can call the lifeguard, and yes, they should be there present, and they're doing a great job. But I would encourage those same people to say, hey, what else am I doing to put myself in the best position to also be this first line of safety in case my kid needed it? And as a dad in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, like I want to be that guy. I don't want to have to depend on somebody else to help me out. Like, and not to say that I wouldn't also take their help, of course, but I want to be able to support myself if needed. That's important to me. Yeah, I mean that clip has been going around for a while now. It's a pretty
Yeah.
old clip, but it's a very
Yeah.
powerful clip. And the gentleman who went and saved the baby, if
Hmm.
I'm not mistaken, he was like unemployed. He ended up getting a job, which is like super powerful.
Okay.
But I think the lesson there is twofold. Number one, I mean, is to have capacity. Now it was like an older grandma and whatnot, but nonetheless, I think the lesson that I picked up too was like being that guy who had the desire to help and the ability to help. Like
Hmm.
that was cool. Like that was a big takeaway for me. Like imagine if you were in that situation, you couldn't help but you wanted to, right? And I think that that's the story I tell my son.
Sure.
The other day I was coming home from jiu-jitsu, and I told my son the story. The other day I was driving home from jiu-jitsu, and a guy was in the middle of the road with his car had stalled, right? It was like an older truck. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this too. So he has the door open and he's trying to walk it, but he couldn't do it because he was just stuck. And I ended up pulling over. I'm like, hey man, you need some help. The guy's like, yeah. So boom, I pushed from the back of the truck, get him to the side of the road, get back home, right? And I told my son, I was like, listen, this is a really good example of what I want you to be able to do in the future. I want you to have the physical capability to help in that situation, to be able to push the truck. But I also want you to have the mindset to want to help, right? That's
Yeah.
important. They're not mutually exclusive. And so I think if you're not training, you're not going to have that capability. But also, if you're not training, you're not going to develop in between the ears this idea of overcoming hard things. And you guys have much different life experiences than I have. And you guys have had to endure hard things, but many people have, right? Everybody has hard stuff that come up in their life, whatever
Yep.
that might be,
Yep.
with kids, with military, whatever. And the more you train, the more you have these micro doses of adversity, the more I feel like you're in a better position that when life does kick you down, you're going to be better prepared to handle it. Because if you've never exposed yourself to any form of adversity, then something happens, it's hard, you know?
Yeah, so I think to answer the question you ask yourself when you're standing at the beach, I feel like a lot of people don't know, and they probably don't uh, run those scenarios through their head. Otherwise, they would probably do something about it. You know what I mean? I think it's good that that we're starting to see more people put that out there, because you got to realize like life is going to happen no matter if you're ready or not, and you better be ready. So I love what you're doing with the train hard, especially. I would think that's you probably get a broader reach there. Is that why it's more fulfilling for you? Not more
Yeah. I
fulfilling,
mean,
but just
it's just different, right? It
right.
allows me to speak authentically to an audience that I wasn't speaking to earlier, like the jujitsu people, the whatever, because it was kind of weird. Like, we have a CrossFit gym, but yet I want to talk to, jujitsu practitioners or whatever. And yeah, to your point, it's a broader reach and it's a little bit of a stronger message in terms of like what I believe in. Um,
Mhm.
and Mike, you bring up a good point, like, do those people think about it? Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe they have a false impression. There's also a lot of people out there, and you see this in jujitsu a lot, where people they think they could do a thing,
Yes.
But if you don't have experience, you can't do the thing, you know,
Right.
like you think you can, but you can't, you know?
To kind of go back to what Denny was saying, just for that, and I use this example all the time. If people watch movies, they think adrenaline gets you through something. And so the firefight that I was in Afghanistan, it was just a couple of us, and I watched grown men walking in the middle of a firefight when the rounds were still coming in because the adrenaline's worn off, and then your physical conditioning kicks in. And that's when it was abundantly clear to me. I was like you adrenaline doesn't get you through much, and you better be physically fit and ready. So then we went back, all got together, and came up with this course to make sure our people that were going to be on the ground were ready. But it is a big misconception. I think people watch movies, they think adrenaline's going to get you through it. Adrenaline's very short, and then after that, it's going to be coming down to your conditioning. Like you said, the skills necessary to get through situations.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about, you know, like the fighting is just such a clear example of that. Yeah.
Well, I actually used to, and Mike knows this, I was a combative instructor in the Army, so I did a lot of like rolling around on the ground and MMA type stuff. I was actually responsible for certifying our unit in certain movements and techniques before we deployed overseas. And one of the things that I learned in training, and I'm sure you obviously know this as a brown belt, is, you know, you have to have the physical capabilities and be conditioned and all of that, but you also have to have your mind right and be able to think, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just like go wild and burn out. So, you know, I should probably get back into jiu-jitsu because one of the things that I missed about it so much was just the conditioning that it does for your mind as well as your body.
Yeah, it's like a game of chess, like human chess, right?
100%.
Like,
Oh yeah.
you know, especially like when you know when you get in like a flow state, man, you're just doing something, they're doing something, you're doing something. And it's just like boom, 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 boom. And yeah, I think there's a lot of power there. You know, I think that yeah, I think that grappling, I think you know, all those arts have so much benefit to them, but I think in particular jiu-jitsu does. I think it's a great sport 'cause you could do it for a really long time. Striking is great, it's amazing, it's necessary, but man, it sucks getting punched and kicked. Like it's and so if you're able to kind of have this more, they call it like the gentle art, right, of jiu-jitsu, but yet you could still do full submissions, full control. And I think that there's something really powerful about that. And it's also something I think for young men to teach them, because the self-confidence that comes with it and the ability, like you're saying, Dane, like to learn how to control yourself. Like one of the things I think that's so powerful about jiu-jitsu is that as you get better and you have someone who's new, instead of just beating up on them, how do you learn how to control your ego, your emotion, your perspective on that training, and give them a good role? Like have them get something out of it, and you too, right? There's so much power in that, you know?
Yeah, and it's funny you put it that way because I can remember just rolling around with guys that were pro MMA fighters that were just fucking awesome, right? And
Right.
you know, knowing that they were just helping me learn and they could just tap me in about 4 seconds if they wanted to. But like you said, just having that control and that discipline and, you know, that desire to maybe teach and just have that control. I always appreciated that and respected that as I was learning, because I knew that at any point, you know, and they would do it, right? Like, all right, it's time to end this thing. And they would just tap me when they could, you know, because they could basically do it on demand. So that's a great point.
Yeah, there's definitely levels to the game. And I think that, you know, if you're a guy listening, you haven't at least exposed yourself to some form of physical combat, I think you should. That could be wrestling, that could be, you name the thing, right? But you should have some type of experience in it.
Yeah, and I think if I was to tell somebody to train, I'd like to hear your perspective on this, right? If when it comes to like any type of physical type combat type sport, if I was going to tell anybody to do anything, it would be jiu-jitsu, right? Because you can protect yourself with it by getting in close and wrapping somebody up, bringing them to the ground. But if you think you're just going to stand up and strike with somebody, all it takes is one punch. You get hit in the chin and you're done. But if you wrap somebody up, you can protect yourself. You can, you know, move your head in certain ways and your hips in certain ways. And you're taught to do that. So if I was to say, you know, get into any combat sport, that's what I would pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways you could take that. I mean, one thing that Henner Gracie talks about is this like red zone and green zone. And so if you think about it like a green zone, if I'm like kind of far away from you, unless you have like the ability to throw a knife or use a pistol, like I'm probably going to be okay. I could still run away, right? I could still run. And so that's kind of like this green zone. Then I'll get within striking distance. Let's just say within your jab or a front kick or whatever. Like that's a red zone, because even someone who's not that trained, if they throw like a really good haymaker and they can knock your ass out, like no question. So that's a red zone. But then once you get past that red zone, you get back in close. If you're able to, again, control them, the likelihood of getting a knockout punch when you're like grabbing onto someone is pretty unlikely, because you can't just create as much momentum, right? And so learning how to control someone, and then be able to take them to the ground and find a position of dominance, I think is just a really important skill, especially for a larger man, right? Like with my kids, my son, I teach him more positions of control, side control, mount, and then submissions from there, because he's going to be a pretty big kid. With my daughter, I talk more about creating distance, creating space, and getting the hell out, right? Because, dude, either one of you guys, there's just zero chance that my daughter is going to be able to get away if you guys really want to keep her there, right? So how do I teach her skills to grip break, do whatever, and run as fast as you can, right? But I think as a man, exposing yourself to physical combat in a very safe, supportive environment in a jiu-jitsu gym, I think can do wonders. And one of two things are going to happen with the guys who are listening to this podcast right now. They're going to show up and they're going to be like, wow, this is so much different. Like I thought I would be able to do something to this person. And then you realize you're just helpless. And they'll either A, be like, hey, this isn't for me, or B, they're going to be like, wow, I want to learn more of this because of how impactful it could be. So I would encourage anybody to do so.
So on that, just because, how would you break someone's belief, myself included, that jiu-jitsu for somebody my age is probably not safe, and the injury rate and all that?
Yeah. So just to, I think that it starts off just, well, I mean, here, hey, Mike, is coming to your gym and doing CrossFit, is it safe for me at 45?
Yeah, exactly. We get the same objections, right? For sure.
But I mean, what would you do to make sure I was in a safe environment? You would have a good coach. You'd start me off slow. You would teach me the fundamentals. You would make sure my mechanics are on point, making sure I'm consistently doing it, and then add load or intensity, right?
Yep.
Same thing goes for jiu-jitsu. The key is identifying appropriate coaches within your environment. I recommend that if you're financially in a position to, start with privates. Start one-on-one with privates. And because it's going to be weird, especially for guys who aren't used to like being that close to another man. It's very awkward. I remember 8 years ago when I started, it was just like very foreign to me to have a guy like in my closed guard. Like that's weird. And so it took me a while doing privates to kind of get past that like initial like spazzing out. So that when I actually got into classes, I wasn't the guy that made other people feel like they were trying to hurt them. And so I would encourage you to start with privates, find a great coach, and then make sure when you actually start doing live rolls, take a deep breath beforehand and say, hey, be a good training partner. Your natural reaction is going to be to want to spaz out and go a little crazy. It's natural. It's not because you're trying to hurt somebody, but that person might take it as you're trying to hurt them, and then the roll escalates. So that's why privates and a good school is so important.
Wow, that's a great answer, man. I love that. You probably convinced me to actually to try jiu-jitsu now. Good sell.
I mean, the thing about it is, here's what I will tell you, is like trying jiu-jitsu is like trying CrossFit or strength conditioning. A year from now, you will not regret exposing yourself to it, because one of two things are going to happen. You're going to do it for a while. You're going to say, hey, I gave that a shot. It wasn't for me. Or you're going to fall in love with it and you're going to say, wow, I wish I had started this earlier. But nonetheless, the lessons you're going to learn, the lessons you're going to be able to impart on other people around you through jiu-jitsu, I think are really powerful.
I love it, brother. So good.
I don't get paid for. I mean, I don't own a jiu-jitsu school. I'm just a big advocate.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious. I was just thinking about something. Like I'm a former athlete, right? I played football, basketball, baseball. Was very competitive, like even in the military with PT tests and everything like that. But I look back and I look at certain games, I look at certain moments, and I'm like, you know what? I wish I would have made this pass or done this or whatever. When you look back at maybe your training or your strategy in some workouts in the opens or whatever, do you ever look back and like kind of wish, you would have done something maybe just a little bit differently, tweak something with your training, tweak something with this particular workout and your strategy or anything like that? Or are you just like, fuck it, I gave it my all, and it is what it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. I love this idea of earned confidence versus perceived. And I think that, I could go into a fight with Mayweather and tell him, I tell myself all I want, I'm going to go knock him out. but the likelihood of me doing that is basically zero. And the reason for it is that that's just perceived confidence. That's just me, bravado, ego pumping me up. But if and maybe this Mayweather is not the best example, but if every day, for example, since I was 5 years old, I had been in a boxing ring, in a gym every single day, earning my confidence for day in and day out for decades, I'd have much more earned confidence to be able to go into the ring and, at least put up a fight. And so when you look at the CrossFit Games as an example, and I do the same thing today as a husband, as a father, as a business owner, it's like, am I earning my confidence every single day to know that I'm reaching my potential is what I'm thinking. And if every day leading up to the CrossFit Games, every single day, I would ask myself, did I do the best I could to put myself in a position to win the CrossFit Games today? Did I? And if the answer was yes, then there was no other work to be done. If the answer was no, the next day I would do something better. The reason why that matters, and you're bringing up a great point, the reason why that matters is that when the competitions came, regionals, open, Team USA, CrossFit Games, whatever, when they came, there was no question if I had earned the right to be there and if I had the confidence to perform. Now that was the case, then I just need to go out and execute. And I would say that at all times, out of all the events I've competed in, I always reached my potential with the exception of one. So that's what I mean is that in every event, at every experience, I feel like I left it all on the table. I did the best I could, given my skill set, given everything I had, except for one time. And one time, it was in 2012 or 11 or 12. I took 5th that year for clarity. I went into the event and I was in 4th place behind a gentleman named Kyle Kasperbauer, and he was in 3rd place. And whoever won, so it was multiple events. It was like this, like Elizabeth, this like you did like this, like
so one ended with Fran.
Yeah, it ended with Fran. So you did like this ring dip thing. Then you did like then you did some clean and jerks. Then you ended up. It was just a lot. It was like 3 events to finish the week that you've been already smashed. And so we go into the final event. So it's 3 events back to back, and they recalibrated the scores as you went along. And so I knew going into the final event that if I beat him, I took 3rd. If he beat me, he took 3rd. That was just the way it went. And so we start off with Fran, and he just blows it out of the water, right? Just smashing it. And at that point, I started to slow down because it was the final event of the weekend. I was already exhausted. I knew I wasn't going to get 3rd. So I just kind of like, I just got weak, right? I got weak. I just mentally gave in just a little bit. And maybe 10%, maybe 5%, I ended up getting passed. Now, would I have been passed up anyways if I had put in my best effort? Maybe I would have, right? And so I'm not taking anything away from the person who passed me. But at the time, I remember breaking down mentally and saying, dude, well, I missed 3rd. I got nothing left. And then I got passed and I ended up taking 5th. And so that was the only time that I looked back on like events and said, dude, that wasn't my potential. That wasn't where I tried my best, and that haunted me for a little bit. Right. And it's not taking anything away from anybody else. It was my own thing saying, hey, I got weak in that moment. I'll never let that happen again.
Love that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And basically, our podcast, Be the Standard, is founded on, 4 principles of, setting standards, creating habits, executing, and holding yourself accountable. And so that's why I brought that up, was that last accountability piece, right? Because I try to tie our core values into, the guests that we bring on and the discussions we have with those guests. So I definitely liked your answer there. And, I think we're all just capable of that, right? We all do it. Nobody's exempt, and we all have our moments of weakness where we're like, shit, like we could have done. I could have trained a little harder on this day. I could have done, this or that, or like I said, made that pass in that basketball game or whatever it is. It's just, it's just part of the human condition, and like I said, nobody's exempt from it. So, it just kind of is what it is.
For sure.
I just love how open and honest you are about it. That's pretty cool.
Oh man, I've had my fair share of just pitfalls, right? I mean, if you look at like 2009 CrossFit Games, I ended up blacking out on, and passed out, right? And in 2010, there's just so much about mindset and conserving energy and appropriately channeling what you have into what you want to perform that I've learned over the years. And I just think that, if guys are listening and they're not trying to get a little bit uncomfortable on a regular basis, I just think you're missing out on a lot of personal growth, like, because the more uncomfortable you get, whether you cold plunge, sauna, competitions, you name it, right? Name the thing that gets you uncomfortable. There's a shit ton of them. That's really where I think you're going to get a little bit of, you'll get quite a bit of growth from. And it's hard to make commitments like that because they do make you a little bit uncomfortable. But I think when you feel that kind of pit in your stomach where you're a little bit nervous, I think that's ultimately where you'll see a lot of growth from. And so if you're feeling that pit talking about jujitsu, maybe that means you should go find a gym.
I'm in. You convinced me. I'm going to try it. I'll report back.
Message me in 6 months and then tell me how awesome it is. Because dude, day one, I'm telling you, it's the craziest thing, man. You got just day one. Most guys, I mean, you're pretty big. Like, what do you weigh, Mike?
245.
Yeah. So if you're a guy who's 180 pounds and has never wrestled, right? Denny, you're 180.
I'm like 180, 190. I'm about 190 right now, but yeah.
Okay. If you're a guy who's like 165 to 175 and there's a female who's been experienced in jiu-jitsu at a higher level, the likelihood of her doing anything she wants with you is pretty high. Like it's pretty crazy how you'll learn. Like size does make a difference. Don't get me wrong. But once you develop some certain level of skills, I mean, it's just mind blowing how a blue belt can just do anything they want to a white belt, and there's nothing they can do to stop them. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I rolled around with a guy a long time ago. He was like 180. I was probably 215 at the time, and he got side control on me, and I couldn't do anything about it. So I definitely can sympathize with that.
Yeah, and like I've been tapped by guys that are 150 pounds, 155 pounds. It's just so much of it's technique. It's just,
dude, 100%. And you talk about getting in the red. The other day I was doing something called Shark Tank, and this is very unfamiliar when it comes to CrossFit. And this is something that jiu-jitsu can offer you that I had never experienced before. So what Shark Tank is like there's one guy in the middle, and then people rotate that are fresh, right? So you got like 5 or 7 guys, and a new guy comes in every minute or 2 minutes or whatever, right? It depends on what the coach is doing. But there's one guy in the middle and just fresh guy. And at some point, the goal is to finish, but at some point, the guy who's in the middle, dude, you just get so physically and mentally exhausted that what you don't want to do is just tap because you're so tired. You want to actually get beat. And man, I'm telling you, when you get in those moments, you realize what it would be like if something was really on the line and you were that exhausted. You don't realize how quickly your mind gives up on you. And it's a big learning lesson that I think anybody could take from it. So get in that Shark Tank and give it a shot.
Love it.
Nice. Yeah, man. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is your podcast.
Sure.
When did you start that? And you have a co-host with that? Gabe, what's his name? Gabe Yanez? Am I saying that right?
Yeah. So I started a podcast many years ago. The original name was like many years ago was I had an AMRAP mentality, and then I had a business of fitness. So those were like, and looking back on it, like those were things I was really interested in, right? Like I was really interested in the business of fitness, and I wrote a book about AMRAP mentality, which is like it's a mindset about being present and focused on whatever you're doing. And so I had 2 different podcasts, which both spoke to 2 different audiences. One was like a CrossFit audience. One was like a business of CrossFit audience. Well, then over time, I was like, you know what? I want to be able to kind of talk about whatever I want. So we branded it Effort Over Everything.
Sure.
And then I'd say about a year ago, we're like, dude, look, let's just call it what it is. It's the Jason Khalipa podcast. I can talk about whatever the hell I want. And I can talk about business. I can talk about family. I can talk about fitness. I can talk about anything I want. And so that's kind of how it evolved. So, we have hundreds and hundreds of episodes, but on the Jason Khalipa podcast, there's only been like 60.
Gotcha. And you're on Apple and Spotify?
Yeah. And, we've had some great guests, just talking about things like, things that matter to us. As of recently, we've been exploring a little bit more of the faith side, which has been cool. Definitely talk about the fitness side, of course, talk a little bit of business, talk about being a dad a lot with different people. Because, for me, it's like, I don't want to look back and be like, I got a, B+, right? Like I get one shot at being a dad, and I'm not prepared to not reach my potential. So that's why we interview these people, because I want to get ideas from them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. that's similar to what we're doing here, right? Like, I don't want to be tied down to, one particular audience, one particular demographic. Be the standard basically means that you're out there trying your hardest to be the best person that you can at all times. And, for us, it's just about bringing on people of just high value, right? People who live that life and people that they're just out there trying to help others. And, Mike and I also are now just getting into, our faith and finding our faith and our relationship with God. So we're starting to talk about that more. And yet again, like we just had Nick Freitas on, and so we're talking about a lot of different things with a lot of different types of people. And but yeah, not just trying not to get held down into one demographic. And it's so far it's working out awesome, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, be the standard it can mean so many different things to different people. I think they need to figure out what their standard is. Like what is your standard you have for yourself? And how you do something is how you do everything. Basically, it's like, what is the standard we want to keep? And then even talking about that as a family. Hey, what's our family core values? Like what's the standard that we set for our family, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable? And I think that be the standard makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I got to give Mike credit for coming up with the name. We wrestled with it for about 4, 5, 6 weeks, and we were just like, finally one day he texted me, he's like, "Be the standard," and I was like, "I like it. I like it."
Yeah, let's do it.
But yeah, I don't know if Mike, if you have any other questions or.
No, man. Like I had some other ones I had in here, but they're irrelevant now. Like where this conversation went is way better. So no, I've asked everything I want. And I really appreciate your openness with everything, brother. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on, and yeah, it means a lot. And I just hope people, got some value out of it. And if they want to check out the podcast, our newsletters, all that kind of stuff, we have a ton of stuff going on. And I would love to have them check it out.
Yeah, man, for sure. We're again grateful to have you. It's been awesome. I knew this would be a nice treat for Mike to have you on. Like I said, I used to do CrossFit. I kind of got away from it a little bit, but so I like to give Mike a hard time about talking about CrossFit and just giving just busting his balls a little bit whenever I can. But it's obviously all in good fun. But again, just thank you so much for taking the time, and very much appreciate having you on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Be able to have, honestly, just like I said, I'm a little fanboy over here, but my favorite CrossFitter ever, the whole time I've been in this space, it's been pretty cool. And just watching your journey is awesome. I can't wait to keep following what you do in the future, brother. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.